Ever feel like you're living multiple lives all at once?
Yeah.
Like all crammed into one? Well, it's kind of what we're looking at today, but like for real. We're diving into the world of twice migrants.
And that's people who've done more than just cross a border, right? They've actually built lives across different cultures, sometimes even continents. It really makes you think about identity in a whole new way.
Right. It's like inheriting this whole legacy of your family's journey, and then you go and layer your own adventure on top of that.
Yeah, and those layered stories, those experiences, that's what we're uncovering today. And to help us unpack it all, we're turning to Twice Migrants, Studies on South Asian Diaspora. It's edited by Professor Mohan K. Gautam and Dr. Moses Seenarine.
Okay, so what makes their take on this so unique?
Well, for starters, this book isn't just an academic study, it's a collaboration, and you can feel that in the writing. It's fueled by actual lived experience.
Oh, I love that. So tell me more about these editors. What makes them the go-to experts for this kind of story?
Well, Professor Gautam's own journey is fascinating. Think India to the Netherlands, spanning multiple fields of expertise, mirroring those multifaceted lives of twice migrants. And it's not just research for him, he's lived it. And then you've got Dr. Seenarine, a Columbia University graduate, bringing in that crucial sociological lens, like how societies shape and are shaped by migration, you know? Their combined perspective just adds so much depth to this whole exploration.
It's like they've woven together all these different threads of knowledge, personal experience.
Exactly. And within this, like, rich tapestry, we're going to be focusing on the stories of East Indian Surinamese women, specifically those who've made the U.S. their home.
Okay, so before we get into their stories, can we just back up a sec? I think it's important to define what exactly makes someone a twice migrant.
You're right. It's a term that deserves unpacking.
It's not just moving twice, right?
Right. Sometimes it's about being descended from people who migrated generations ago, you know, maybe due to major historical events, things like indentured servitude. And then generations later, you choose to migrate again yourself. Other times it might be moving to one country, building a whole life there, and then, boom, making a second big move to a completely different part of the world. It's about these layered experiences of migration, you know, each one shaping identity and belonging in these really unique ways.
So it's not just about the number of moves, but the complexity of those journeys and what they do to people's lives. And in our case today, it's women whose families were part of the Indian diaspora in Suriname and who then decided to build new lives in the United States.
Precisely. And their stories offer this fascinating window into the motivations, the challenges, the triumphs of this unique group of twice migrants.
I'm hooked already. So are we ready to dive into the why behind their journeys? What led these women to make such a significant move, not just once, but twice in their lives? So we're talking about women making this huge decision to leave Suriname, a place already full of cultural layers, and starting fresh in the U.S. It makes you wonder, what were they hoping to find here? What was missing back home?
Well, I think like a lot of immigrant stories, the hope for a better life, you know, especially economically, it really shines through in their stories. These women, they were really determined to make a better future for themselves, and their kids especially.
I can imagine. But it wasn't just about climbing the economic ladder, right?
Yeah.
I mean, Suriname has this incredibly unique blend of cultures and this whole history tied to indentured servitude. What was the backdrop these women were coming from?
You've hit on a really important point, and the book Twice Migrants actually dives deep into this whole historical context with a whole chapter dedicated to the East Indian experience in Suriname. It's written by someone named Hanan Orna.
Okay, so we're going even deeper down the rabbit hole here. I'm ready.
It's fascinating stuff. So picture this. It's the 19th century, right? And you've got all these East Indians being brought to Suriname as indentured laborers. Many of them were facing really, really difficult situations back in India, socioeconomically speaking. We're talking people from different parts of India with their own like caste dynamics and struggles all kind of thrown together in this new land.
And expected to just build a life under what sounds like a deeply unfair system.
It's true, yeah. And the book doesn't sugarcoat it, you know. Exploitation was rampant, and those contracts often felt more like tools of control rather than, you know, actual agreements.
Right.
But, and here's the inspiring part, even in the face of all that, these communities, they found a way to survive, and not just survive, but to thrive. They held on to their traditions, they built new lives, and they became this integral part of Surinamese society.
It makes you think, right, to overcome that kind of adversity and still build something lasting. It makes you wonder if that experience, that legacy of resilience, maybe that's part of what shaped how later generations thought about migration. Like, well, our families already faced down incredible challenges. maybe we can handle another one to reach for something better.
You're really catching on. Because here's the thing, even after Suriname gained independence in 1975, a lot of East Indians, they still felt like they were on the outside looking in, socially, economically, even politically. So for some, migrating to the U.S., it wasn't just about a better life, practically speaking, but about finding a place where they really, truly belonged, where their contributions were actually valued, you know?
So it's this multi-layered thing, right? It's the echo of their ancestors' resilience, the desire for economic advancement, and then this very human need to belong. But even with the best intentions, we know starting over in a new country is never easy. What were some of the biggest hurdles these women faced when they got to the U.S.?
One of the biggest hurdles, language, for sure. Imagine you come to the U.S., you've got your college degree from Suriname, you're ready to work, to contribute, and you're told it's not enough. Like, imagine being told you can't teach in New York City.
That's incredibly frustrating, all that expertise. And
Yeah.
what about just the day-to-day cultural difference? And how do they navigate all of that?
It was definitely a balancing act. Orna's research really highlights how these women had to adapt, you know, to the fast-paced life, the urban environment of the U.S., and at the same time, they were trying so hard to hold on to their own cultural heritage. Imagine trying to raise children with values and traditions that maybe aren't fully understood or even appreciated in this new place.
It's like that saying, you can take the woman out of Suriname, but you can't take Suriname out of the woman.
Exactly. They were juggling so much, raising kids, often working multiple jobs, all while navigating this new culture and trying to find a sense of community. It's incredible, really, their strength.
Okay, so we've talked about their reasons for leaving Suriname, the historical context, the challenges they faced here in the U.S., but what I'm really curious about is how this whole experience, this dual lens of being a twice migrant, how did that shape the way these women saw things like race and class in America? It really makes you think about how their experiences in Suriname, what they'd already been through, might have changed how they saw things here in the U.S., especially when it comes to stuff like race and class.
And that's where Orna's research takes this really interesting turn, actually. She found that a lot of these women, they didn't really see a ton of discrimination in the U.S.
Really? That's kind of unexpected. I mean, especially considering everything they went through, both in Suriname and then as immigrants in a whole new country.
Exactly. It makes
yeah.
you wonder, right? Like, did their experiences maybe even changed how they were seeing things? Remember, they were coming from a place where all those issues, race, class, ethnicity, it was already so complex, you know? They'd been navigating those unspoken social rules for their entire lives.
So maybe they just saw it through a different lens, like they had a higher bar for what was actually discrimination.
It's a real possibility. Plus, so many of these women, they were laser focused on building a good future for their families, working hard, finding a community, all that. Their energy was going in a different direction. It's not to say that discrimination didn't exist, but maybe they experienced it differently or saw it through this different lens.
It just shows you everyone's experience is different, right? Even within a group that shares this common background. It makes me think of that part in the book where one woman, she talks about this awful experience she had, like blatant job discrimination, and yet others didn't have similar stories. It just adds so many layers to how we understand these issues.
I know, right? And that's exactly why it's so important to hear these stories, these individual experiences. It challenges us to look beyond those generalizations and really grapple with individual lives, those nuances within the larger trends.
And speaking of individual experiences, our outline mentions this idea of like threads of resilience.
Yeah.
I love that. I'm curious, how did these women build those support networks in a whole new country, especially as a smaller immigrant group?
Resourcefulness, that's what it came down to. Of course, family played a big part even from afar. It's that connection to their roots, that encouragement. But they were incredible at creating these close-knit communities. They drew strength from their shared culture, their traditions, their religion.
There's something so powerful about finding that connection, that little piece of home, when everything around you is new.
It's amazing. And the book also talks about how important cultural organizations were. They became these spaces where they could connect with others who really understood their language, their food, their experiences.
Like a little slice of Suriname right here in the U.S. But I imagine raising kids here while also trying to hold on to their heritage, I bet that came with its own set of challenges.
Yes. Oh, absolutely. It was this constant balancing act. A lot of the women, they saw the U.S. education system as this pathway to a better life, something their kids might not have had otherwise.
Even if it meant maybe that their children grew up with values or perspectives that were different from their own.
It's the classic immigrant dilemma, right? How do you embrace new opportunities while holding on to those roots? The book doesn't pretend to have the answers, but it shows us how these women wrestled with these questions in their own lives. Like, they made a real effort to pass down their traditions through language, food, even religious practices.
So as we start to wrap up our deep dive into the world of twice migrants, what would you say is the biggest takeaway from these stories, especially for those who maybe aren't familiar with the specific experience, the Surinamese East Indian experience?
For me, it's that reminder that identity is always in motion. It's fluid, always changing. These women, they were navigating multiple worlds at once. They carried their history with them, but they also forged their own paths. Their stories, they encourage us to think differently about migration, about belonging, about what it really means to build a life across borders, across cultures.
It reminds us that everyone has a story, these layers of experience that shape how they see the world. And on that note, here's something for our listeners to think about. We've been talking about the Surinamese East Indian experience today, but their story is just one small part of this much larger story, right? This huge global tapestry of twice migrants. What other stories are out there? What can we learn from those who've made multiple journeys across cultures, across continents? It's incredible when you think about it.
Hold on to those questions, keep asking them. I promise you, the answers, they'll amaze you, they'll open up a whole new world of understanding.